This is chapter 6, a chapter on listening. Listening is, of course, a very important part of the communication process. Without listening, you wouldn't have the full communication process because you need a sender and a receiver. If we just talk at someone and they don't receive our message, then it's not really communication. So it takes that second party listening to us and responding to our messages. So listening is defined as the process of receiving, understanding, remembering, evaluating, and responding to verbal, spoken, or written messages. This is from page 158 of your textbook. They also include nonverbal as a part of the listening process, which to an extent is understandable. Things to know about listening is that it is crucial workplace and of course in relationships as well. For our relationships to improve, whether they be working or personal relationships, communication must take place. And so the listening process is vastly important. There are 5 overlapping stages that we will look at over the next few minutes. And it's important to understand that when we listen, our listening is never perfect. There are distractions, there are misinterpretations, and that's because we are not perfect people. No one is. And so, thus, anything we do will run into problems. Let's start with stage 1 of the listening process, and that is the receiving nature of listening. So as I said, in the communication process that we covered in chapter 1, it's senders and receivers. So the first step in listening is to receive. So whenever we receive messages, we need to make sure that we are focusing on the message at hand, focusing our attention. We're avoiding distractions in the environment, whether that be taking earbuds out of our ears or turning down music that's playing ambiently, or it's turning off the TV, putting down our book, whatever it is. We need to make sure that we maintain our roles as listeners, not insisting on being in charge of the communication. So we need to avoid interrupting and taking over conversations. In addition, with stage 1, we have what are called disclaimers. Kind of a strange concept, but it is a type of feed forward that we have discussed in the past. It's an upfront qualifier, and you see the these different qualifiers here. Hedging, where you separate yourself from the message. Credentialing helps you establish qualifications. Send licenses asks for permission to deviate in some way from a normally accepted convention. Cognitive disclaimers, the way that your textbook defines this, is helps you make the case that you are in full possession of your faculties. With their example, I know you think I'm crazy when I say this, but let me explain it. And then the last one is appeals for suspension of judgment. It's where you ask someone to hear you out before they make a decision. These are all types of disclaimers, a type of feed forward before we actually get into our message. Stage 2 of the listening process is understanding. Obviously, this is an important part of listening, that we actually decode and understand properly. So first of all, you need to make sure that you avoid any kind of overconfidence. Don't assume that you know what's being talked about, or don't assume that you understand completely. There are some other steps that we might take, and we'll talk about those in another lecture. Try to see things from the speaker's point of view because we have biases in the way that we approach things. It will impact our language. Ask questions to aid in your understanding. Make sure that you do so in your own turn, so don't cut anybody off, but ask those questions for clarity's sake. And then the last one there is about paraphrasing information. We can really judge if we understand something, if we can put it into our own words and the information is still accurate. Stage 3 is remembering. When it comes to remembering things, it's important to know when it comes to information, our brains don't reproduce information, they reconstruct it. So you're never going to be able to recite word for word what somebody told you. Never is the wrong word there. Some people have that gift and they can recite things exactly the way they were said. It doesn't mean they'll always understand the intent or the meaning behind those words, though. So we reconstruct what meaning we think somebody had when they shared information with us. If we actually retain the information, that information is passed from short-term to long-term memory. Our short-term memory has only a small amount of space for storage, and it doesn't stick with us for very long. So long-term is where we want to store things that we wish to be able to reconstruct or remember later on. So 4 suggestions from your text on this are to focus on the central ideas of what someone is telling you, to organize information into chunks of information, things that are related to each other. Unite the information you're receiving with information you already know about a subject. And then finally, repeat. Whether it be names or key concepts, repeat these things either in your head or out loud, depending on what's appropriate, to try to help you remember those things in the long term. Sometimes if you meet someone for the first time, you turn right around and say their name back to them. It's nice to meet you, Bill, or whatever their name is. That way you can maybe remember their name long term. We have stage 4, evaluating. So we want to remain objective when we evaluate information, as objective as we can. Resist immediate evaluations. Try to put a timer on yourself to put those things off that you hope to have a judgment by a specific time, but not until after a specific time has passed, perhaps. Especially if you're the more judgmental type of person. Listen so that you can distinguish facts from opinions. Today, a lot of people like to express their opinions and tell you exactly what they think, but oftentimes they share very few facts along the way. If you are actually consuming information, you want to be able to tell the difference between facts and opinions. Identify the biases that are present. Everyone who is alive is biased. Bias is the lens through which we view the world, and our life experiences shape our bias. So when we share information, we share it from the perspective through which we learned it and the way we see reality from our perspective. Also, when we listen from a perspective of bias. So being able to identify your bias as a listener and their bias as a speaker will help you remain objective. And then, of course, there are fallacies of reasoning. If you are consuming information, you want to be aware of things like name-calling and what's called an ad hominem fallacy. Sometimes people use testimonials, positive or negative ones, false appeals to credibility, things along those lines. And then there's the bandwagon appeal, the idea that, hey, everybody else is doing this, so you should too. It's not typically a good argument if you're trying to persuade someone. So we try to pick those out as listeners so that we're not talked into something that we shouldn't be. And then as speakers, you should try to avoid those fallacies. Final stage here, stage 5, is responding. The term backup or back channeling, it's kind of strange, but it's basically just what I've called prods in the past. It's things to indicate that you want someone to continue talking. It's using expressions like, I see, uh-huh, go on, whether they're used in succession or they're just used periodically. They are things that indicate that you are listening and that you want the person to continue talking. Whenever you respond to someone in a spoken form, typically we want to be positive and support the speaker. Even if we disagree with what they said, don't attack the person, support the person, and maybe disagree with the idea. It says to own your responses. That means you're responding for yourself, not anyone else. And so speak for yourself. This is what I think, instead of, well, nobody believes that. Well, I'm not sure I believe that. So it's just a change in language there. Sometimes we have a tendency to want to give advice, even whenever we haven't been asked to do so. So we should avoid that in most cases. Focus on the other person. You cannot multitask. Even if you think you are highly capable, your brain is not capable of multitasking efficiently. Our brains are meant to do one activity on a cognitive level at a time. And then one temptation we oftentimes face is to finish someone else's sentence. Avoid completing their thought, whether that's in your own head or you say it out loud. Wait till they finish talking before you respond.